Hey there, all that are watching right now live on Facebook, and those of you that are listening later on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube, or other. There's like a million different places where you can listen to podcasts now. But to everybody out there listening, welcome to Don't Listen to Me. Simple show based off the premise that I know very little about anything, and I have a lot of friends that know a lot of things. So I love introducing the world to my friends and letting them share some of their expertise with the world. So definitely don't listen to anything I say. That's my disclaimer on this show. But definitely listen to my guests today, Nick and Kim Bogardus, who I'm excited to have on the show with me. Hey, if you are watching live on Facebook, you can comment and ask questions or throw stuff in there. We can see that. And if it's a good question, we'll try to answer it. If it's a bad question, we'll pretend like it never got posted. and so that's one of the benefits of watching live. So yeah, feel free to do that. You can also help me out by subscribing on podcasts and on YouTube and all the other platforms. So subscribe, click to get notifications, leave a review. All that stuff helps me out getting the word out about this show. Like I said, I've got a good friend of mine on, Nick Bogardus, and his wife Kim, who we haven't spent a bunch of time together, but I already like you more than your husband, and so
it's usually the case. No. It's a total lie.
Yeah. So you guys are my first couple that I've had on the show together.
All right, man. Well,
what a great segue, because that's what we see a lot.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what we're about.
Yeah, it's great. And honestly, Nick, I think I talked to you about this a while ago when we were planning this out a little bit, is honestly the ladies do so much better in the interviews than the guys. That I don't know what it is, but all my interviews with ladies are always 10 times better than the dudes. No offense to the dudes. Love the dudes I've had on the show, but the ladies have been so much better.
Yeah.
Way to set the bar real high.
Better at life, better at these interviews. Go
for sure. I think. For sure. Well, so I've asked you guys to come on the show. There's a lot. Nick and I, we're kind of friends based off the fact that I don't think we have the ability to stop starting new businesses or planting churches or whatever that is in us. And so I think we're pretty different personalities, but we can kind of unite around our kind of entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah. You think that's fair to say, Nick?
I think that's fair. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I asked you guys to come on today because one, your website, your company, relational leadership, and then you've got some new stuff that you're working on as well. But I wanted you guys to come on today and talk about all of that and what that's all about. And we'll get into that in a minute. But first, why don't you fill people in on who you guys are? What brought you to this point today? Who are you? What makes you guys tick? You've got a wild career path of all over the place. So why don't you share with the world all that is the Bogardus household?
How much time do we have here, Matt?
As much as you want. We can do this long format if we need to.
The average attention span on Facebook is about 3 seconds.
30 seconds.
So, yeah.
And we're done.
All right, you go for it. You go first.
Oh, man. Well, Nick and I met because of a lie. So I was interning. He was working in the music industry at the time. I was interning at Drive-Thru Records, for any of you weirdos that would like pop punk. And so I thought he was super cool and cute. And so I sent him, back when MySpace was cool, okay? I know it's not there anymore. But I tried to add him as a friend to just kind of snoop a little, honestly, to see if maybe I could work for him instead of this label that's all in LA. He came back with a, "Do I know you?" And so I was like, I totally lied. I froze and I lied, guys. So God can redeem anything, because now we're married 12 years. But I lied. I met him at Warped Tour. And then we ended up meeting, what was it, a few weeks later?
Yep.
We were friends for about 1.5 years. We were both dating other people. And then I had actually signed up for a 2.5-year commitment with the Peace Corps. And so I was leaving for Mongolia, and about 3 weeks before my assignment, it was supposed to be our goodbye hangout, and ended up being our first date. So,
oh man,
It's changed significantly. I did my assignment. I was there about 10 months by myself, flew back to the States, took all my vacation time in advance, flew back to the States. We got married 2 weeks later, packed him up and moved him out. And then I finished my service. So another 18 months we were living overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And then.
So we spent the first year and a half of our marriage in a developing nation, sandwiched between China and Russia, where it got to -40 in the winter and 100-something in the summer.
Our fights were
And
really interesting.
It was an interesting way to start a marriage, that's for sure.
In a cement block.
But it was also
apartment.
the first time that we really got to, we talk about that time in our lives. It's like, it made us a team. Because while we were over there, it was the first time that we did ministry together. It was the first time that we worked with these students together. We developed a TV series for the cable news network in the country because it was run by Christians, and so during the day they would have national news, and then at night they would have Christian programming, and so we produced a series on
like testimonies and stuff.
Yeah, it was basically kind of what Jesus had done in the lives of Mongolians, like kind of coming out of common struggles that people have in the country of alcoholism, domestic violence, things like that. And so we got to do that. And that was the first time we really got to build something together. And so that was really formative.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Dude, I had no idea you guys did that.
Yeah. Kim did the first art exhibit in their city. Because the Russians never had art, or they never, seemed to.
It was never incorporated.
Yeah, incorporated in the schools.
But in my English students, I would see them like doodle in their notebooks, and I was like, oh, they have something going on. And they're really crafty, like people in general, of just what they can build and make. And so that was super fun. Taught them photography for a couple years and did an art exhibit. And
where her college professor sent over a box of cameras for the kids to use. And then Kim taught them a bunch of photography, and then we developed that. We developed it. Displayed it. And then we sold it. But we actually did it again back here in the States and sold them. Yeah, we did in Long Beach. To send back to them for
we gave them money for college. Yeah. So that was cool. Wow. Sold their art here in the States. That was really fun.
That's where that's where we started.
That was like the teamwork. I started there. But then you got hired, like the last month of my service, he got hired by Marcel. So we went from Mongolia straight to Seattle, was there for a few years, and then came down, planted a church back in Nick's old roots, and we've been in Orange County ever since.
Man. So, so you had hold on, let me get this straight. A career in music. Right? A career in Mongolia, doing things. Mega church, like 15,000 people at least claimed at some point, right? Something like that
states.
big. And then planted a church on your own. That's at like 15,000 people right now, right? So this church you're at, it's like 15,000, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe 1% of that. I mean, you brought up the entrepreneurial part, and like I can just remember. Some of my earliest memories were like playing Army we lived by a riverbed in Southern California, which looks very different than Colorado. Like in Colorado, it's there's no boundaries on it. You can kind of go play in nature. In California, there's fences and concrete, and so don't get
8 industrial buildings.
Yeah, totally. But we would play Army, and I was always, my dad would say I was always the one that was like organizing the troop, of these little kids that were going to go attack these imaginary bad guys, and starting a lawn company with my brother. And then, that led into music, and I worked in music for about 10 years, and started at a company that was a management company and a record label, and the management company managed No Doubt and The Offspring and Social Distortion and Nine Inch Nails. And the record label was like an indie label that had like Social Distortion and Sunny Day Real Estate and No Knife. And so it was a really interesting experience for me because I got to see how both sides of the business worked, how huge artists were managed and led and developed, and how little independent artists were developed. And then around, in 2000 is when I basically first heard Thrice, and that's what kind of led me to start my own business. And I did that for another 8 years until we left for Mongolia. And so that grew from me and a Hotmail account in my bedroom at my parents' house to
That's still your email, right? You still use Hotmail, right?
totally. Nikki Eatworld at hotmail.com.
Nikki Eatworld.
Just kidding.
Oh, nice.
It grew from me and a Hotmail account in my parents' bedroom to me and 4 of the managers and 6 bands and all the bands starting at like a garage level to major label. They all did well, and that was a great experience. And then that transitioned into ministry. And it's funny. Actually, our neighbor was asking me the other day. She's a funny older lady, and she was like, she was looking at my tattoos, and she's like, "You have a lot of tattoos for a pastor." And I was like, "Well, not for one that worked in music for 10 years beforehand." And she said, "Well, those sound like very different things." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean,
there's more correlations than you think."
There are more correlations. I mean, on one hand,
Yeah.
I'm positive. On a positive side, like you want your artists to have something to say, and in in ministry, we believe we have something to offer the world in our message. But there's also the funny part, which is like you're still dealing with messy people in both circumstances. So anyway, that's some of the music back.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that because most listeners who check this out know me a little bit, but they know that I'm in the bar and restaurant industry as well. And I get that from people all the time. Like, you own a bar and you're a pastor? Like, how does that work? And I go, well, it works well in Boulder.
Totally.
There's a lot of places where it wouldn't, but I always, my go-to line is clergy have been in the beer and wine industry a lot longer than hipsters,
That's right, man.
So I'm just reclaiming it, man.
That's right.
Wine.
It is, you mentioned, the two of us getting to know each other. And that was honestly something I was really excited about with the cohort, like knowing your background and knowing your bent towards just being involved in multiple spheres. That really, was interesting to me. And you've been really helpful. The stuff that we have started in the last 4 months, you were a big catalyst for when we were sitting in Tahoe and talked about it. And so I'm thankful for that.
Well, you're too kind.
I think that when it comes to starting stuff, and have you read Andy Crouch's Playing God, where he talks about power?
No, I'm catching up on books because I just graduated seminary, so I'm finally getting to read books that I care about again. And that one's actually on my list. So no, I have not yet.
Well, he talks about power in a way that I think really deeply resonated with me and might with you and other people that are bent similarly to us, of similar personalities. And that is, he talks about it through the lens of creative power. He says, like, most people are view power by its distortions, corrupt politicians, oppressive, selfish businessmen, abusive spouses, stuff like that. But when you look at how God uses his power in a way that is always creative, that is how we should be using our power. And that was like, when I read that, I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, that's who I've been at my best. And that's what we want to keep doing. And so that concept of power that is used in order to bring about something that didn't exist before for the good of people who might use it or come in contact with it, then that's what we want to do. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. And, it's interesting walking that line, right, between ministry and entrepreneurship and whatever sphere that might be in. And I think people really quickly want to separate those two things and be like, you have this job and you have this job. Yeah. So much so to the point where I actually have started kind of rejecting the term bivocational. I'm like, no, I have a vocation, which is ministry, which is doing things, and it works itself out dependent on the personality of the individual differently. Like, I meet a lot of people who are like, hey, Matt, I want to do what you do. And quite frankly, I'm like, you probably shouldn't, because you're doing what I can't do. Like, there's people who do things. It's funny. We're talking about like how we got our start in ministry. I became a Christian later in life, like in college, like right before I came to college. And I remember showing up to college and going, how am I going to make money? All I know is the party world. Those are kind of my people. And so I set myself up to start selling. I would sell cups at parties. So people, when they'd come in, they'd buy cups from me and they could drink all night. And I thought that was a good way to do ministry and like make money on the side, but not drink myself because I was underage, and then help people when they got too drunk kind of thing.
That's an
so
elevated.
it's
DD
totally
right there.
ridiculous now. Yeah. I mean, it's like now I go, oh my gosh, I needed a mentor to be like, Matt, you're like one step below drug dealer, and so, but it's kind of just even going, what was God doing in me there, where I was like, I wanted to help people. I wanted to be around a certain crowd, but I wanted to do ministry, but I didn't have that fleshed out. And so just as we get older, I think we figure out how we integrate ministry and what we do and how we serve people kind of almost more holistically instead of a bifurcated kind of existence. Like, I'm not painting houses. Not that that's wrong, but I'm doing something that speaks to my personality, So it's an interesting thing to play around with. So, So your guys' website, tell me if I'm getting it right, relationalleadership.co, right? .co.
That's correct. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. There's that one. There's relationalleadership.co and relationalenneagram.com.
Yeah.
Those are the
Got
two
it. Right. Doing. Yep. Those are the two. You should all go there and sign up for things. And we'll talk more about that. But so I hopped on your website and Kim or Nick, I'd love to hear you guys share a little bit about this. I got on there and the very first line grabbed my attention, and I bet you can guess what it is. It's right at the top. Competency is not enough. Talk about that. I'm like, I love that statement. I think I've used it before. I probably stole it from your website and didn't even know it, and then claimed it as my own. But so maybe talk about that a little bit. Why is that your first foot forward on your website? The first thing you see.
Yeah. You want to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of ties into what Nick was saying about Andy Crouch's book, where you think of leadership development, so many of the business world books or what you're going to get taught primarily focus on skill. And so with us in leadership development, we come in and we're like, you're smart enough to do your job. You wouldn't be a CEO. You wouldn't be a leader of an organization if you were dumb, right? You got to where you are, not because you lack skills, but what we see time and time and time again, whether it's in marriage counseling or leadership development, which is there's a relational piece that people just don't develop as quickly as they do skills of competence in their field. And so the problem typically, if they're stuck, has something to do with that. It's not that you're not competent. It's that there's some emotional intelligence or relational skills that have gotten diminished or ignored over time for the sake of you thriving in a job or a field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me say, add another two angles on that. And the first, that's one reason why we like to do stuff together, because leadership is fundamentally relational. Mm-hmm. Whether you are starting a business or planting a church or leading a team of some kind, like it's always relational. And that's why we like to do this together, because we like to serve, we especially like to serve couples, especially in our worlds. In our worlds of ministry, a lot of times everything's focused on the pastor and not the wife, and we want to help address the needs and strengths of wives in ministry. Yeah, that partnership and strengthen that, because I mean, Matt, like you and Amy, like you couldn't do what you do without her, and she wouldn't thrive like she does without you, and like we need each other to do that well. And so there's that piece of it. And then there's the other piece of it in our current circumstances in COVID and everything going on socially around us. Like at the bottom of it, because leadership is relational, the most challenging parts right now for anybody leading anything have nothing to do with competence and almost everything to do with relationship. Like when I talk to people who are exhausted and confused and frustrated, it's not necessarily because they can't figure out or solve a problem. Yeah. It's because they're trying to navigate, how do I lead people in this complex age well? And so that relational piece is what we really want to emphasize. Like the competency is not enough. It's the bottom line. People have written about this, about the difference between good good and great leaders. Like
Yeah.
good leaders have the normal skills that a leader would have, a vision, strategy, organization, stuff like that. But really great leaders that, Matt, you've probably experienced, I certainly have experienced, really great leaders have those emotional intelligence capacities that are really needed of self-awareness and self-management and social management and things like that.
Yep.
And so those are really key. And then maybe even negatively, you could add this other nuance to the truth that competency is not enough. As you look at really bad leaders, what has derailed people in the business world, whether it's like Travis from Uber or Adam from WeWork, it wasn't their competency. It was their how they related to people. Or in ministry, it was, there's enough high profile pastors of, McDonald or Driscoll or the people like that where like they were super competent, but the way that they related with people really brought them down. And so the competency is not enough.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit more about, I totally agree with the relational stuff. And that's why I wanted to have you on here. It's like, maybe I do need to have people on here I disagree with more, but I've only had people on here I agree with so far. But what we both ascribe to some training that we've all gone through, whether that's fellowship associates or the guys from Crosspoint or different things like that. But the most powerful thing that we can bring or give to another person is our transformed and transforming presence. Yeah. Right. That's something that we say in our church all the time. But maybe the difficulty that people are feeling now more than ever is I'm stuck. Like, this is as personal as a lot of people are getting what we're doing right now. And digital latency doesn't make, like, I would love to be doing this interview in person across the table much more than over this, right? It's better. The interviews are just better when you do it in person because you actually can feel the presence. Not that this is bad or anything like that, but it's one of those things where people are probably going, I'm not having even the normal relational connection. I'm hearing people that would normally describe themselves as introverts longing to be around people again, and they're not able to do it. Yeah. And so what would you say if you're dealing with a client right now that you guys would work with and they're going like, I hear you that this relational thing is so important, but how in the world am I supposed to do that right now? Yeah. Answer that question for us, guys.
Yeah, you got it.
I think you just start with the fact that it is hard, right? Everyone's feeling that. And I think like you said, Matt, it comes down to the fact that that is an innate desire and a wiring in us as human beings is to be relational and to desire closeness, whether in proximity or in shared experiences. And it's a loss. Everyone's feeling that. It is a deep loss, and it's sad and it's frustrating. And so I think just starting with the fact of naming that, like, this is really hard. And here are the things I miss. And it's okay to give voice to that and give space and time to that because it's a valid feeling. But then too, I do think, and you've seen these memes and everything all over the internet of like, well, now God is really letting creation thrive and we're getting back to what's most important in our inner circles of influence. And there's an element of that I think is actually true where our kids have gotten way more time with us, way more experiences, and just the mundane things of like, what are we going to bake today? What do you want to color? And like played more Legos than we have in like the 4 years, know? And so there's an element of that at least for me, like a certain amount of feeling that can exist in our innermost circles of influence because we have nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so we have neighbors that are like, I just want you to check on me, like an elderly lady, and just, I'm still here. I'm around. Dave, what are you doing? And just allowing like the heartbreak and the difficulty to actually be something that bonds you relationally to people as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great.
That's good. No, that's good. I think admitting it, engaging the circles you have is important. Yeah. I mean, it's wild to think through. I mean, it's like we have COVID, right? And then it's not that it was stacked on. It just became more aware where things around racial tensions in the United States. And I was thinking about this as I was preparing for our conversation. And our church just did a panel where we invited from our church, and we only broadcasted it to people of our church. I was like, this is not a publicity play. This is a time for our church to kind of sit around and talk. But we had 7 people of color from our church come and just kind of share their experience and what they're going through. And it was it was so different than what I see online. It was like these people were so gracious and kind and wonderful, and we all connected. There was tears. It was all social distance. Everybody online, there was masks worn before the interviews and all that good stuff. But just being with a group of 7 people that I hadn't seen and who were especially going through something deeply traumatic and heavy right now, and just listening to them share, oh my gosh, I felt like I got my tank filled up in a way that I hadn't in months. You know?
Yeah,
it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So let's keep rolling here a little bit.
Yeah.
So obviously relationships matter, but you guys talk a lot about trust, influence, resilience. I love the word resilience. That's one of my favorite words. Is I would say my goal as a pastor with the people that I pastor is I want to build, particularly now, a resilient body that follows Jesus Christ.
Yep.
So maybe help people know. I think people understand trust a little bit and influence, but maybe resilience is kind of one that they're like, oh, what's that about?
Yeah. I mean, resilience is the ability to take a hit and bounce back, right? It's an persevering, adaptable response to challenge. And that's the thing, is it assumes challenge, right? We actually built that similarly into our mission statement as a church a little over a year ago, actually. And that I've had to emphasize that in different settings of like, this means for us that we're anticipating challenge, right? Like that we don't assume that this is going to be a comfortable thing. That's why we're putting it out front, that we're going to have to call each other to be resilient. So resilience assumes a challenge. It is clear-eyed about the difficulty of life, and it can persevere and adapt when met with those kind of resistances.
Yeah.
There's 2 kind of quotes that come to mind too when I think about that term, and one is Men of Courage. Who's that? Larry Crabb. Larry Crabb, where he just talks about masculinity, but I think of it in terms of resilience anyway, which is, what is it? Moving through chaos
and darkness towards relationship. Yeah.
And then you think of the Teddy Roosevelt quote that I know Brene Brown ripped off for Daring Greatly, or it was like the base of her book, right? Of like getting in the arena. And I think when you make that distinction of like, you can't be resilient and be the one that's outside the crowd just pointing fingers. Like, resilience requires you to get your hands dirty. And so it requires an element of moving past those fears or challenges and being willing to fail and to try again, knowing that like, this is important. This is a step forward. This is something I care about. And I'm willing to risk failure for the fact of trying. And so that requires, I look at it through that lens of, you can't be the one on the outside criticizing. You won't build resilience in that arena. So.
Yeah, no, that's great, especially given today, because right now the arena is big in our world.
Yeah.
And so how would a relationally smart or sensitive person, maybe that would be a better way of putting it, how would somebody who's maybe, okay, I'm kind of that person in the arena, how am I going to relationally step into kind of a better reality of that, one that's not on the sidelines, one that is resilient? If you're coach, because that's what you guys do, you coach some people up. So obviously I don't want to give it all away for free. I want them to pay you to do this, but but help the people out a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, a few things just off the cuff, depending on a person's circumstance. I would probably start with, certainly don't go alone. Like, who's going to be with you in this? The second thing might be to remind them that anything they want in life is going to involve challenge and risk. Those would be the 2 places I would start. What about you?
Yeah. There's an element too of, like you were saying, as things have changed over time, just in you as an adult, like growing up and finding like, oh, well, I actually have these passions, and I can do something more than just this one vocation. But start there too with like, what are you good at? What do you enjoy? And what do people like get on board with you for? That's going to be the easiest way, trying something where it's like, I'm not an artist. My mom and my brother have like the most incredible skills. I draw the ugliest stick figures. And so for me to be like, I'm going to get in the arena and I'm just going to like, just paint the next Mona Lisa. Like, let's not fool ourselves. So let's make it realistic, because I think a lot of people's struggle comes through striving to do something that they're not actually good at.
That's good.
And so by, I think, having those three things of what do you like to do? What are you also good at? Because there's some things you like to do that you're not good at, but those two together. And then having the relational piece of what do people around you say about you doing those things will give you some courage, at least, to step forward into those spheres that are a little more scary.
For sure. So let's think about this now. Let's move it into kind of the team thing. So right now, a lot of teams are meeting like this, or they're meeting within their office. I was talking to a woman from our church yesterday. They work for a big financial firm, but they're only allowing 4 people in the office at a time. Right. Like, and they can come in and then they have to it's like going to the gym right now. I don't know about in California, but our gyms are kind of open, but it's like 1 hour block. You have to book out and then you can come in and you have to, all that stuff. But anyways, she was telling me, and she said last night, she goes, man, it just seems like we just feel stuck. Like it feels like our teams are just in mud. And I'm looking at this woman who is one of the most competent people that I know. Right. And I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, she knows what to do, but I don't think doing things, the mechanical side that she's been trained in and is great at executing, is the way forward, particularly in the season that she is the leader of a very large financial institution and finds herself in. And she's going, and we just had dinner with them last night, and she was just like, how do I move forward? And I was like, man, that would be a great question for tomorrow. I was like, I'm not going to answer. You have to tune in tomorrow. So, because I don't know. Remember, the whole premise of the show is don't listen to me. Maybe talk about that, because I think that's right up your guys' alley.
I think I'd probably start with not solving the problem for her, but looking first at this is where tools like the Enneagram and personality assessments like that can be very helpful, because people respond to crisis out of who they are in kind of in an exaggerated way, right? So if she is a very competent person, like you mentioned, or a very effective person, she's likely going to, in the midst of uncertainty and difficulty, double down on those things. And so I would probably start by going like, okay, but why are you doing that? And how are these circumstances making you feel? And is this actually the appropriate response to double down? Or is there another response that might actually be more healthy and helpful for this moment? I would probably start there. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an element of, again, naming the reality of the situation and why it's difficult and allowing her space to do that. I think it's really important. And then 2, what's behind the struggle? What's actually keeping it? Is it resources and people? Typically not. No, it's something internal that's usually like, I'm afraid. There's like a fear. There can be an anger. And that's where I think you're saying with the assessment, it kind of helps you give a way forward of what piece about this is difficult and what's hindering me, because it's typically something internal, not external. So drill down on that.
Would you guys say that utilizing something like the Enneagram, and not something, I would just say it's my favorite test out there. So I'm just going to say the Enneagram. But would you say that utilizing something like that, particularly now, is a tool to help your teams maybe build things like trust and unity and things like that?
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
Because, when we talk about the Enneagram, we like it because its emphasis is on how you relate. It's not on your function. It's really how people experience you and how you relate with those around you. And so whether that's right now and understanding, I wrote an article for our email list on this, that like when you understand the dynamics of the individuals and your team as a whole, you can start to understand, here's why this person's responding with this exaggerated paranoia in this moment, right? And here's why this person is digging in their heels, and here's why this person is just getting 100 things done today that I didn't even ask them to do. You start to see, oh, here's what they're doing and why. And so the Enneagram can be a super helpful tool for that, and it can also be a super helpful tool when we start to pivot out of this. We'll start to hire again or shift their teams around based on adapting to things they've learned as this. I would say don't neglect that tool in particular, because you can start to make good hires that fit well with the dynamics on your team, and get people in this, that they can work well with the people around them.
But a lot of times with the Enneagram, and this is something that just a shameless plug, that we like, the one that we wrote so well is it shows you all of your styles. Because typically you'll find people, right? People label, well, leaders are always an 8 or a 3. And that's true. But as we've gone into organizations and we're looking at their team dynamic across the board, it's like, the accountants all share a few similar styles, but they have all these other ones that are different. Or the design team will share these particular things that make them good at what they do. But it's those secondary ones that are really fascinating in seeing, like, where are the blind spots on the team? Where should our next hire be that makes up for these weaknesses that we have? And it's really helpful, I think, for that tool. But the second thing I would say, and this kind of goes back to the previous question, which is I don't think you can separate story from what someone's doing. So even the Enneagram is like, it's really important to tie in like what you've lived, because it really matters into shaping who you are and how you function and how you operate and how you relate. And so a story is just so crucial. And I think it gets left out of a lot of, especially, for-profit organizations where they're like, we're here to talk business. I don't want to hear story, but it's so crucial in understanding how your people are wired and how they respond to crisis, like people are doing in coronavirus. So
for sure. Yeah. I mean, totally agree with that. I utilize the Enneagram. I've got some stuff coming out that I'm doing with it soon that I know I've shared with you, but I won't get into that now. But one of the things I always encourage people is don't just pay attention to your high scores. That's what we want to do. That's a good Western mindset, right? Is where am I? Where do I rate the highest? I'm like, man, you should probably pay more attention to where you have a deficit. Right. You're going to do that stuff. What are the things you're not doing? Because that's what everybody else is noticing, particularly on your team. And then just piggyback off it. Like that's part of your story is why you've developed that and why you've learned that. And what is happening in you implicitly versus explicitly as you navigate these things as a leader is you need help. Right. Well, we all need help.
Yeah, that's right.
You need to.
And a lot of times help from the outside can be the most helpful because it can be objective and see things that a lot of people just kind of breeze over because they're so close to them.
Yeah. It's harder to take that feedback too from people that are closest to you, right? Which is why consulting and coaching is so wonderful, because you just have this outside perspective of this person that's for you, but also hasn't been hurt by you or doesn't have these, the underlying issues. So
speaking of story, let me go here. I'm going off script a little bit from my notes. I just thought of it, but what taught you guys? What made you, and what in your story made you go, you know what? Trust and unity over the mechanical things. That kind of deep seat. Like, why is that a good place to start over just the competence side of things, like the hard skills? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, for me, it was experiencing really, really great leadership through. I've been lucky enough to work with some really wonderful leaders. From my football coach in high school, who was voted like top in the state, who was just an unbelievable coach, to Jim Guerno, the guy who I worked for when I started in music, who was one of the top 3 managers in all of the music industry. And yet he still stopped to help me with my deals when I was just starting a business. And up into people I worked with, even at Mars Hill, I've gotten to work with some really good leaders. And once I learned the EQ part of the equation, it gave me understanding for, that's why they were so good. Like they weren't just competent. They were really good at their vocations, but their ability to selflessly, self-sacrificially, be aware of the people around them and actually want good for them, was, if I were to pick a fictional character, like Coach Taylor in Friday Night Lights is like my favorite picture.
Who wouldn't pick Coach
man.
Taylor? Come on.
Oh, man.
Nick dressed as him for Halloween one year, and I was Tammy Taylor. It was good. It was a good year for us.
For like 3 days.
I slept in his coach hat.
I have so many thoughts about that are inappropriate for this show that maybe we could talk about someday later. But
when recording stops, it's good.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
But similarly, experiencing really negative leadership as well, which we have, and seeing that these people were incredibly competent. What was so wrong with them? They could be so blind and hurtful. Oh, well, they were lacking this entire category of leadership skills. So those were my experience. Yeah.
Similarly, I think it's I know the word gets kind of dragged through the mud, but thinking in terms of legacy, if you're thinking primarily about yourself and there's this self-focus of growing in your role and your competence, you kind of leave out the other people. So I think the most impactful relationships that I had were people that cared about the impact that they had on those around them. I didn't grow up in like a Christian home and single mom that was super busy. We were latchkey kids. And I remember in junior high going to my friend Kayla's house and seeing a marriage for the first time where like the husband and wife enjoyed each other. And I remember just being like, what's going on in here? The siblings got along. And I was like, there's something different about these people. And it was honestly just the way that they related. And it was so impactful. And I think of the teachers that spurred me on to do, some of the work. Like I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And that was strictly at the mercy of like these teachers in East Texas that are like, we're going to help you do this because we see something in you. And so there's an element with leadership too, is looking and seeing the good in other people and being able to name that instead of focusing on your own selfish gain. And I think that's the most impactful is how does my legacy tie into allowing other people to flourish in what they're gifted in strictly on just looking at what I want to achieve. So that's probably been the biggest one for me.
Yeah. And even hearing Kim describe that reminds me of like, this is actually just what excites us the most, like helping people grow in these ways, have that kind of impact on their families, on their teams, on their workplace, like being able to help people extend that kind of impact is like, man, that's just super life-giving for us. We love that.
Because it goes so far beyond just the work. So we can come into an organization, we can work with people, but what you're saying, what excites us the most is knowing like these tools that they're using to operate within their team well goes far beyond that, it's how they engage with their neighbors. It's how they love their family when they get home at the end of the day. Yeah. It has so much more impact and reach than I think people anticipate.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I can tell just as we started talking about that, I'm glad I asked that question because I saw you both kind of spark up a little bit. And Kim, someday we'll have to figure out because you're describing your story and I'm like, are you telling my story? We'll have to talk more about that at some point. I remember going to a home and having that same experience and being like, you guys eat together? That's cool.
No one's yelling. I don't understand.
Yeah. And so, but all of that to say, I can see, and that's why I would encourage people, whether it's taking advantage of something like the services you guys offer through relational leadership or relational Enneagram or whatever that is, but having a coach, a consultant, somebody, but I would encourage people is find some people that can help you that actually genuinely care about the things that we're talking about here. Because there's a lot of coaching services out there. There's a lot of stuff.
We call them the cheerleaders. No one needs a cheerleader.
No. I remember when we hired our first coach and consultant for our church, our first bill came back as it said it was labeled as an intervention. And I was like, oh gosh, I didn't know we were that bad.
That's where the truth was delivered.
Not in this session, but I'm going to let you know right here on this.
It was definitely delivered the time of, and I was like, but that kind of put the stamp on it. I was like, oh, they're not here to just, coddle us. They're here to help us. And so, and so that's one of the things that I've enjoyed talking to you guys about here today. Just real quick, as we start to wrap up, why don't you guys share? We've talked to a good amount about the relational leadership website, which join that mail list. I get it. Nick, your emails are great. I love getting stuff from you guys, reading it, but talk a little bit about your new project.
Cool. So relational Enneagram, we've been working on relational leadership for a little while now. I mean, since the end of last year, I think, like since November. And as we were building it, one hole that I kind of kept, that came to my mind, because it's something we've experienced for years now, is that a lot of the Enneagram resources out there are either super dated, haven't been touched in decades, and the language is just not helpful, or the data is so thin and reductionistic that it's not helpful. And like that's kind of what Kate was referring to earlier, tests that just give you a single number back rather than showing your entire personality. Like no one's one particular number. People are far more complex than that. Yeah. And so we basically were like, well, let's solve this problem. Let's give people, I wanted to solve two problems. One, we wanted to create a test that was clear and a report that was helpful and could help people make the changes they want to make. And then I also wanted to provide for people in the helping professions, therapists, pastors, counselors, even HR people, a platform where they could administer the test themselves and use it as an income stream that could help offset costs if they're a nonprofit, or be an income stream for people who are coaches or consultants.
Because those people are using assessments anyway.
That's right.
And so the money is typically going somewhere else.
That's right.
But we wanted to come in with, okay, what can you use internally as an organization that also helps the organization? That's right.
And so we created that, and we just launched it basically 10 days ago. So there's a business platform and there's an individual platform. And so the individuals can come and take tests. There's going to be basically kind of three levels of tests. One is just like a really fundamental one. It's the cheapest. The middle option is going to be like the full built out report, which offers categories that a lot of other reports don't offer, like fear and longing and vice and virtue, and integrative steps you can take to move forward. And then there's going to be an option for just personal coaching with people who are trained in the Enneagram, especially our approach to the Enneagram, that can be really helpful individually for people who have specific questions on circumstances in their life, how to move forward. So that was really an important project for us, and we're excited to see how it can be helpful.
Yeah. What's the website for that? Where can people find that?
relationalenneagram.com.
relationalenneagram.com. Check it out. I'm using it personally for some stuff that I'm working on. Highly recommend it. So
thanks, Matt.
You guys did a ton of work on that, and it looks awesome. Yeah. So, and I'm totally ripping off your stuff from there and making myself look great. So
that's so good.
Yeah. So, well, hey guys, I really appreciate you guys coming on. Where can so people can find you? relationalenneagram.com. relationalleadership.co. Any other places to hunt you guys down, or anything you need to share with the world?
Those, you can find the both of us.
That's it. Yeah. We're always cooking in the Bogardus house. Nick's other entrepreneurial side gig was a family
during
company.
COVID.
During COVID. Got
our
kids involved, cooking and baking. So there's that.
Well, Nick and I are always sending each other Marco Polos back and forth on tacos, so we've got that going. And some drink consultations. So actually, I will share this with you guys. On Monday, I believe it or not, I'm actually going to Florida, which sounds insane right now, but I have to. My business is down there, but I'm going to do some live streaming from our bar down there on how to make some of my favorite cocktails. So people can tune in there. And,
we will be tuned in.
And we'll do Bible studies and cocktails, and it'll be a good time.
That's awesome.
So cool.
Well, Kim, Nick, thank you guys so much for joining me. Hey, everybody who watched and is participating, thank you guys so much. You can catch this on podcast, Stitcher, YouTube, all that good stuff. It'll be coming out in the next week or so on there. In the meantime, episodes are up. You can go back, listen to my interview with Eddie Williams and Steve Snyder and a bunch of other people. And You can listen to all that there on iTunes or on YouTube. So go check that out. And so, hey, everybody who tunes in and watches, thanks for the love, and we will see you next time on